Welcome to the Legends of College Football Show on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. The Legends of College Football Show is brought to you by Replenishing Care Technologies, the future of sports medicine. If you want to find out more about them, go to thegruelingtruth.net and click on the banner. It'll take you right to their website. I'm your host for the College Football Legends Show, Mike Goodpaster, and it's an absolute pleasure of mine to introduce what I think is one of the greatest college football coaches we've ever seen. Did a great job at the University of Pitt, Mississippi State, Texas A&M, numerous other places. Help me welcome to the show Coach Jackie Sherrill. How you doing, Coach?
Doing great. Thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Now, the one thing that stands out to me before we get to the interview is I've interviewed a handful of guys that have played for you, and it always impresses me when there's a coach and these guys 20, 30 years later spend 5 or 10 minutes talking about you because you had that big of an impact in their life. And that has to be, I would think, for a coach, the most important thing when all's said and done.
It is. It's, unfortunately today we have too many young coaches that are trying to be their player's friend instead of being their coach. And I kind of equate that of being a friend to your kids or being a parent. And I can tell you that my players, back when I had them, they did not like me all the time and I would tell them, you're not going to like me all the time, and I am not going to like you. I said, that's not the issue. The issue is that we respect each other, have trust and faith, and we communicate. But my job is to be your coach, and your position is to be a player. And so the great coaches, whether it's Lombardi or, you can go on and down to the college today with Nick and Urban, is you have to be able to make players do things they don't want to do. And you also have to help them accomplish things they didn't think they could accomplish. And when those two happens, years later, you become friends, and that really ends up in all the coaches that played for, or players that played for Coach Lombardi. I can tell you, they probably cussed him every day, but years later, the word is, I love the guy. And same thing with raising kids. And, the problem we have with kids today is, you have parents that are not parents. They're trying to be the kids' friends.
Yeah, and I think that when you equate that, it was similar to like when I was 15 or 16 years old, I was always mad at what my parents were telling me. But by the time you get to be 25, 30, 35, and especially when you get older than that, you realize everything they told you was for a good reason. And 99% of the time, if not 100% of the time, they were right.
Absolutely. And same thing as a coach, a good coach. And they are able to take players, mold players, and help players reach positions that they never could think they could reach. And it also, you have to be able to take players and somehow see what they can do best and put them in those positions. I've always said there's 4 things in a coach. His job is to practice the players, prepare the players mentally, practice the players very, very physically, because the game should be easier than practice. But the most important thing is putting the players in the right positions. And if you do the first 3, then you get out of the way and let the players perform.
Yeah, and when you look at your career, I mean, the thing that stands out to me is 1962 to 1965, playing for the legendary Bear Bryant at Alabama. I assume that you find yourself, when you were coaching, going back to a lot of things that Coach Bryant had probably said or done.
Absolutely. And there were 86 players that came in my freshman year, counting the walk-ons. I think we had either 45 or 50 scholarship players, and had the rest of them walk-ons. And there were 7 seniors together. We had 4 red shirts, so there were 11 total out of 86. And my kid Coach Stallings all the time, they talk about the Junction Boys. And I said, Coach, you only had Coach Bryant. I had Coach Bryant and you. And, he always laughed at it, but that was true. It's if it was easy to be a head coach, anybody could be. Yeah. So why is there only a few head coaches that are able to win? And it's very simple. I mean, you just have to put the players, the biggest is put them in the right position to let them perform. I always laughed when coaches would say, well, we'll have a kickoff to see who my kicker is. Well, that tells me he absolutely has no knowledge of what a kicker is. And same thing when you have players in positions and you put them in a position during the game and they lose the game, it wasn't them. And I've told a lot of head coaches, I said, hey, did you apologize to the player? And most of them would say, what do you mean? I said, well, it wasn't his fault. It was your fault. You put him in that position, and he was not a player to play that position.
Yeah, and then I would think a lot of things with Bear Bryant. You had a lot of big personalities on those Alabama teams outside of just the coach. I mean, you had Joe Namath was the quarterback there for a while. I think Kenny Stabler might have come in towards the end of your 4 years there.
I was very fortunate. We had Joe Namath, Steve's son, which was my roommate at one time, Kenny Stabler, and so we had some great players that, at an early age, I learned what a quarterback should be and was.
Yeah, and I mean, you couldn't find 2 better ones than Namath and Stabler. The thing we always hear about is, Namath wasn't as good in the NFL because of the knees. I would imagine you got to see him before the knee problems. What was your take on Joe Namath?
Joe is the best athlete I ever played or coached. It didn't matter what you wanted to do. If you wanted to play basketball, you wouldn't get a shot off. And he, even back then, would go to the baseline and he would stuff it with both hands backwards. If you wanted to play baseball, I mean, he had a chance to go play Major League Baseball. If you wanted to pitch quarters at a line, you wasn't going to win. If you wanted to go play pool, you would. But he ran 4-5.
Yeah.
We had some really great track stars, guys that won the 60 indoor, but they could not outrun him on grass.
Yeah, and
we
go ahead. Sorry about that.
Yeah, back then they used to hang a tire in the middle of the goalpost, and they would swing it. And I saw Joe throw the ball 35 yards through the tire swinging. I mean, again, far as a true athlete, I've had the opportunity to coach a lot of great players. But when you talk about a total athlete, Joe probably was the best athlete that, golf or basketball, whatever you wanted to go play, he would beat you somehow.
So I know after your career at Alabama, you became a graduate assistant for Coach Bryant. Were you somebody that was always looking to be a coach, or when exactly did that come into your mind that that's what you wanted to be?
No, I went into graduate school and that's I was paying my way through graduate school being a GA, and then my roommate Bobby Roper came in from Arkansas, and we were graduate assistants together. And I said, well, I'll just go to Arkansas and finish my master's. And I remember meeting Coach Bryant when he was walking into his office one day, and I asked him if he would call Coach Broyles and to help me get to Arkansas. And the first question was, do they have a job? And I said, no, sir, I'm going there as a GA. And he didn't look at me. He walked straight in the office, and he wasn't very happy that I was leaving Alabama to go to Arkansas to be a GA when I was a GA at Alabama. But he did tell Coach Bailey to call Coach Broyles and get the job for me.
Yeah, so Frank Broyles, another coaching legend. If you compare him to Bear Bryant, what were some of the differences? What were some of the similarities?
Well, I was fortunate. I played and coached for Coach Bryant. Coach Broyles, I worked for a year, and then I worked for Coach Majors for 8 years. And they all were different. Coach Bryant, is a man's man. Everything you wanted to be in a man. He's very, very big. He was 6'4", very physical, but also very caring, very smart. And Coach Broyles was probably the best businessman, and Coach Majors was the best PR guy. And Coach Majors 20 years later could probably tell you your name and where they met and what they talked about. But they all were different. And but Coach Bryant, no one touches Coach Bryant. And everybody talks about Nick today, and Nick's got a lot more advantages. I don't want to take anything away from Nick because he's done an outstanding job. But Coach Bryant set the stage, and he did it by himself.
Yeah, because Alabama wasn't really Alabama until Coach Bryant got there.
No. But Coach Bryant did things that no one else even knew about. He built the reserve at Alabama. He built the reserve. I think they had $20 million in reserve. There wasn't any athletic department in the country that had that kind of money in reserve. And, he gave the faculty, I want to say 1 year, either $500,000 out of the athletic funds to give them a raise because they were not getting a raise through the university. But I don't know of any AD in the country is giving money to the university for faculty raises. So Coach Bryant did things that no one else even knew about. But he took care. One thing that Coach did, he took care of his players. And if you played for him, you were very, very important to him. And that's probably where, I took quite a bit of that in my coaching, where players are important. Players win, coaches don't. Yeah. All the coaches that take credit for winning, that's good. I mean, even the championship game when, the quarterback changed, but Nick didn't have a choice. They couldn't run on Georgia.
Yeah.
So they had to throw the football, and that was a wise decision. But the last play, you can say it was a great call, and the quarterback made a great throw, which he did. All those were true. But as a coach, it was the defensive call that allowed that touchdown.
Exactly.
They did not touch their receivers. They let them off the ball scot-free, and they played halves of the field. Now, I don't care whether it's high school, junior high, or pro ball. There's no safety that's on the hash line can cover a receiver that has that kind of speed going down the sideline. It's not going to happen.
Well, if you're going to talk about those games, I want to bring up another one. That would have been the semifinal game that Oklahoma played, because it still blows my mind that Oklahoma, at the end of that game, with a chance to win it in the overtime, just kind of settled for a field goal when they had the best player on the field there.
Well, I don't know if any of us can second guess unless we're in that position. But yes, we do second guess.
Yeah, we got to. If we don't, none of us will be able to do anything after we got done coaching.
Yeah, yeah. When I go watch a game, I go up in the press box and I question myself, and I chart the game so I get a feel and know what's going on. And then the second half, you're able to watch and socialize. But I don't like to talk to people in the first half. I want to watch the game and kind of chart it and take notes and then enjoy it the second half.
All right, then you go on to Pitt. Well, you went to Iowa State first with Coach Majors, and then you went with him to Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh was not a great program at that time. You want to talk a little bit about – Go ahead.
They were 1-10, 1-10, and 1-10 the 3 previous years.
Now, what did Coach Majors do to kind of change the culture of that program?
Recruited the right players, and one especially named Tony Dorsett.
Yeah. Tony was a great running back. I think one of the greatest I ever saw, and I don't think he gets near the credit that he deserves for that either.
No, I mean, still the same record in pro ball. He has the first time he touched the ball in pro ball was 98 yards, and I kid him all the time, and he said, "Coach, you're right." I said, "Tony, you ran 98 yards because you were scared." And he started laughing. He said, "Coach, they called the inside play, and all I was thinking, they're going to knock the dog out of me." And I hit the hole as fast as I could, and I never looked back. Yes, I was scared.
Yeah, you had a lot of guys that were great players at Pitt, like Gary Burley on the defensive side, Tony Dorsett. You went to Washington State for a year, but then you came back as the head coach at Pitt, and you guys had a lot of great success. You want to talk a little bit about it had to be probably hard kind of replacing Johnny Majors after he won a national championship.
Well, it was, but the advantage I had is I recruited most of the players that were there.
Yeah.
So I had a knowledge, and I had a great free safety, Bob Jury, and when I recruited Bob, I remember distinctly telling him, I said, "Bob, you're my ticket to the Coaches Hall of Fame, because you're going to take me there winning a Scholar Athlete Award." And sure enough, he did. But great player. And he came to me the spring I came back and came in my office, and he said, "Coach, you're not the same person that you were." And I started laughing, and I said, "Bob, that's probably true." I said, "I'm in charge of everybody now, not just you guys. So there's a lot of decisions I have to make and a lot of things I have to do. It's different." But I was able to have an open door policy for players to come in and say what they wanted to say. And I remember at Mississippi State one year and I go back to when I was at Alabama, Coach Bryant was listening to some of Duffy or some of the other coaches, and so he was going to start a squad committee, and he called, I think we had 2 sophomores, 3 juniors, and 4 seniors on the squad committee. And we called us in after practice, and I raised my hand and I said, Coach, I think we ought to have, 3 class cuts. You're not here to cut class. And then he goes into talking about Tim Davis. Tim Davis was a senior kicker. He was a 4-point student in going to med school. And he said he has deserved the right to handle himself academically, meaning that they're not going to check his classes. And I said, Coach, a rule for one's a rule for all. He did not say a word. We all got up and left because we knew the meeting was over and there was not going to be any squad committee. So years later, at Mississippi State, I was getting ready to do a squad committee, so I told the players in the meeting and put the players on the board that were in it, and I had a great player, Kiefer McGee, and so we're going to practice after the squad meeting, and he said, Coach, I don't want to be on the squad committee. And I said, Kiefer, what are you talking about? He said, Coach, you're not going to do what we suggest anyway. I don't want to be on it. And he was a lot smarter because I don't know of any head coach that says they have a squad committee that's going to do exactly what the players want him to do. Yeah. It's not going to happen. So I didn't have a squad committee at Mississippi State.
And you talked about recruiting players at Pitt. It also helped when you recruited Dan Marino.
He was a great player, no question. He was when I saw him in the All-Star game, he played in 2, but the first one he played in, he was a man playing with kids, and so polished, so much ability. But what people don't realize, his first love was baseball.
Yeah.
And I wasn't worrying about him going to a major football, Notre Dame or Penn State or Michigan. I was concerned and worried about him going to Clemson or Arizona State or someplace that had a great baseball program. And because that's what he really loved. But thank goodness for the NCAA, because that was the year they sat around the table and made a decision without the body vote, but made a decision if you signed a major league contract, then you could not be on scholarship to play football.
Yeah.
And you had Danny Ainge the year before. You had Wilson. You had that went to sign with Maryland. You had Ainge Gibson from Michigan State, Ainge from BYU the year before, and signed and played summer league, and then was still on scholarship. But that's the year they changed it. And so the decision that Danny really had in his family was if he signed that contract and wouldn't play baseball, then he could not, he had to pay his own way to college to play football. So Kansas City drafted him, I think, in the 4th round, but they only offered him $35,000 signing bonus. And I remember we were at the kitchen table when the scout was there or whoever was there to sign him, and he told him that they were going to move George Brett to first base and he would be their third baseman. And I stopped him right then, and I said, wait a minute. I said, you're telling me that you're going to move George Brett to first base and Danny Marino will be third, and that's how much you really think about Danny Marino's talent? I said, then why is he only getting X in signing bonus? I said, if that's what you're saying, then that signing bonus should be $1 million.
Yeah.
I got up and walked out. He didn't sign.
Well, a lot of those guys will tell those kids anything to get them to sign too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and you had some great teams. You played in some great games, but I think the rivalry that stuck out to me because I'd have probably been, late 70s. I'd have been 10, 11, 12 years old. But I think people forget the intensity and how big the Penn State Pitt rivalry was back in those times from the mid 70s to the early to mid 80s. You want to talk a little bit about that rivalry with Penn State
Well,
and Joe Paterno?
yeah. Yes, there was no question that Coach Paterno owned the East. And when we went there and all of a sudden having success in recruiting, that didn't fit well with Coach Paterno. And I remember in 1977, the first year I came back as the head coach, I called him on the phone and I said, Coach, we need to get together because our staffs are out there really chopping each other up. And he says, we're not getting together. I don't need you. Well, 3 years later or 4 years later, he calls me, and I think it was 3 years later. He didn't call me, but he sent somebody over to study and see what we were doing with our kids academically. So I called him on the phone, and I said, Coach, you didn't call me before you sent this guy over. And he said that was an AD to AD call, not a coach. I said, well, these are the players, and they're my players. But anyway, I said, Coach, I tried to call you 3 years ago and get together. And he said, Jackie, I didn't need you then. So I reversed it and said, Joe, I don't need you now.
So I assume and Coach Paterno were best friends at that time.
No, I kidded him years later because Peggy and I were invited to his home for dinner, and during their recruiting weekend, which was a Saturday night, plus sitting in the box with his wife Sue and at one of the games. And I remember telling Coach, I said, Coach, I'm a tag along. You invited Peggy. You didn't invite me. And he started laughing. He said, yeah, that's probably right. And then I saw him when he played A&M again, when he played A&M in the Alamo Bowl. And I walked up to him before the game and I said, good luck. And he put his arms around my neck and he said, Jackie, you don't mean that. I started laughing and I said, well, partly I do. But, we ended up with a very good relationship, but not when I was a coach at Pittsburgh.
All right, so after the 1981 season, which I think you guys were 11-1, you lost the one game. You won, I think, the Sugar Bowl that year. But you You go ahead.
Yeah, we were number one in the nation for 7 weeks, and then we played Penn State. We jump out ahead 14-0. Danny is throwing the ball out of the end zone. Their defensive back makes a great play, jumps up, tips the ball. He falls on the ground, and the ball falls right down to him. And then the next play they call a takeoff, and instead of running the football, because they were dropping 9 people and only rushing 2, that was a dumb maneuver by the head coach, whoever he was. And instead of we have Danny, we'll win the game. And we should have run the football, and we probably would have. But that game really cost us a national championship.
All right, and then after that season, you moved on to Texas A&M. You replaced, I think, Tom Wilson. You signed a 6-year contract. You were very successful there also. The thing that sticks out to me, though, is the 12th-man kickoff team. And for some of the younger people that may not know exactly what that was when you were there, you want to explain that, how you came up with that idea?
Well, A&M had the bonfire then. and they started what they call cut, which they would go out into the woods and cut the trees. And basically it was a right, a utility right that they were going to cut the trees anyway. So they would go out and cut the trees, but they would carry the logs out by hand. Now, some of them were in 2-4 inches in diameter, but some of them were 5 foot to 6 foot in diameter. So you can imagine what those trunks weighed. But you had to carry them out by hand, and what they had was they called cheat logs, which they would put under the tree, and they'd have 20 or 40 guys that would lift at one time and carry it out of the woods by hand. And then they would stack them by size, and they would build the bonfire. But they start in September, and it took all the way until the end of November or Thanksgiving before they would have it built. And I kept passing by and finally stopped, and they put me up on the 4th stack wiring. So I really enjoyed it. And then when I saw them pass the red pots, and when they pass the red pots, that means that the kid bent over and took 3 slats, and he said, take your best shot. And he did, and it's with an axe handle now. And the axe handle broke, and they started it all over. And I knew what that felt like, because going through A Club, I had that myself. And I said, there's 40,000 students here. I can find 11 guys that doesn't care anything about their body, is crazy, and do anything for A&M to make a kickoff team with them. Because I had a little kid, one of the best kickoff guys I ever had was named Glennie Meyer in Pittsburgh. And he wasn't but 5'6" maybe, but he was great as a kickoff cover guy. And so that stuck in my mind that we could find him. We had a tryout. We had 252 sign up, and we whittled that down to 40. 40 came out to spring and went through spring practice, and then we cut that down to 20 for the fall. And every year we'd start all over. And just because you were on the team the year before, you still had to earn the right to be on it the next year. And if somebody was better than you, you wouldn't be on it. But I wasn't smart enough at that time to realize what I had done, because I was taking the student body. When they talk about the 12th man in Texas A&M, it started in 1922 at the Dixie Classic with King Gill. He was a football basketball player, but he was in the press box body. And they were running out of players, so they asked him to come down. He did, and went under the stadium and changed into the uniform and stood on the sideline. And that's from that point on, 1922, is why the students stand for the whole game. And that means that they're standing ready to help. Yeah. And so what it did were these guys were their classmates, their roommates, their double date guys, on and on. And they brought the student body to the field, the real 12th man. And it was a great success. The furthest kickoff was 46 yards, and that was Bo Jackson in a Cotton Bowl, but their average was 12.5. And I mean, they were good. And it wasn't like they didn't go against, Tim Brown, Bo Jackson, Metcalf. I mean, I can go on and on against some of the best that ever returned, and even in pro ball. But they never had one cross the 50-yard line.
Yeah, and your Texas A&M teams there won 3 straight Southwest Conference championships, 85, 86, and 87. You beat Bo Jackson 36-16. You beat Notre Dame 35-10. We won't talk about that Ohio State game. But in your 6 years at Texas A&M, what do you think was the highlight? What stands out the most to you?
Well, beating Texas, for so many years, and it's the same across the country, and it's the same in pro ball too. You have Texas dominated Texas A&M. You had Oklahoma dominating Oklahoma State. You had, you can go on at different states where Penn State dominated Pittsburgh.
Yeah. So
for so many years, Texas and everything that A&M did was always like their brother did. And in 84, we go over to Texas. They win the game. They go to the Cotton Bowl, and we beat them 37-12. Well, that completely flipped everything. The perception, how people, and then the next year we win three straight conference, championships, and go to the Cotton Bowl. Back then, you had the cotton, the rose, the sugar, and the orange, and they all were tied up with conference championships. And then they would invite an opponent to come in.
Yeah,
but that was the biggest game
too, Jackie.
Oh, it's going to happen. I made a statement publicly that it's that game is not only important to the state, to the fans, but to the nationally, and no AD is going to make that decision. The decision is going to be made by the state legislature if they, within the next 3 to 5 years, if they don't agree to play, it'll be on the ballot, and they will force them to play out of the state legislation.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the few coaches to ever leave Texas A&M with a winning record against Texas.
I was fortunate. We were won 5 straight, and then when I went to Mississippi State in 1991, thank goodness for the rain shower, then it just became humid and they wilted in the second half, and so we beat them in 91 at Mississippi State, which really gave the credibility to the program, and because there's no way that Mississippi State was going to beat Texas A&M. Beat Texas. And then the next year in 92, we came to Austin, and again, we beat him pretty handily. So I was able to win as a coach 7 games in a row, and I don't know if any coach had ever beat Texas 7 years as they played them.
Yeah, and the impressive thing there is you took over Mississippi State. They hadn't had a winning season in like 4 or 5 seasons. And the one thing that I was going to ask you about was your use of junior college players. I know that you and Bill Snyder are usually attributed to be 2 of the first guys to really go to the JUCO ranks to help your programs out.
Well, there's 2 states, 3 really, California, Texas, California, Kansas, and Mississippi, that has the best junior college leagues.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids that you recruited ended up in junior college. So it wasn't like you didn't know anything about them, and you were able to, at least get them for 2 years. So Coach Snyder uses that and has done a great job. And the same thing, what people don't realize is how many junior college players out of California that end up helping every university out there become winners. One of the biggest junior college players was O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, Pasadena
in
Community
California.
College. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he turned out to not be too bad of a player. Um, when we look at this, you retired after Mississippi State. That would have been over a decade ago. Was the transition hard for you?
Well, I did radio and television studio for a while, and what you miss more than anything else are the players. You miss the ability to, coach players, again, to help players do things they don't think they can do, accomplish things. And that's what you really miss. I don't care how old a coach is. Can he still coach? Yes, there's no question. Has the game changed? The game's changed, but not the fundamentals of the game. If I remember telling Coach Majors years ago, he asked me what could I coach, and I said, Coach, if you're a coach, you can coach anything.
Yeah. And
I really firmly believe that if you are a coach, you can coach any position. That doesn't mean you can't learn it or that you had to play it. The only position I felt that it was really comparable that you wanted a coach that played quarterback to coach your quarterbacks.
Yeah. So when you look at the game today, everything is still the same. But the thing that I think that has really changed, especially at the NFL level, but it's just how much you can go live in practice. Do you think that leads to maybe poor mechanics tackling, stuff like that?
It leads to a lot of things. Coach Bryant was smarter than anybody. This is back in 1962 now. He would take the pads off of us in practice. There wasn't anybody in the country taking pads off of their players. And, of all the teams I had, the best talented team, and if the head coach had been better, we would have won it all. But it was 1980, and we had 3 in the first, 11 in the first 7, and 18 went to camp off of that team. And I remember the first day of pads, at the end of practice, I put the ball on the 6-yard line, and you had 3 plays to score. If you scored, you went in. Defense had to stay out and run. And if you didn't score, defense went in, and you had to stay out and run. And I remember in 1980, I put the ball down, and we ran 2 plays. I blew the whistle, and I said, we're not going to wear pads the rest of the year. We did not wear full pads at any practice. We wore headgears and shoulder pads the whole year.
Yeah.
So it takes a better athlete to practice without lower pads on, because you're always staying up. You're always positioning yourself in the right position. And it didn't mean we still had drills and still had things that you would do in full pads, but we wouldn't go to the ground. And you get sloppy sometimes when you're in full pads. So to answer your question, no, I'm probably excited that that in pro ball they only allow them to go full contact 1 day a week, but they don't need to be out there in full gear.
No, especially an NFL player. If they don't already know how to tackle, there's a problem to begin with.
Yeah, but in college, you have to spend time developing, and you have to spend time during that to in tackling and how to position yourself.
Yeah.
We're all enamored, and this is the teams that score the most points. I would say the head coaches could care less about defense. They just feel that give me the ball back and we can win the game. Well, that doesn't happen. I don't know how many people that are throwing the ball all over the park that are winning national championships. I think the teams that can play defense. And what's the difference today? The difference is you're not having those 300-plus defensive linemen. You have to match player to player. The throwing game, or the wide open throwing game, just didn't come on the scene. That's been all the way back with Mouse Davis in California. So it's called the run and shoot.
Yeah.
And whenever we played the run and shoot, I'd take out 2 defensive tackles and move the defensive ends down and put in 2 more strong safeties to be the outside linebackers. And you had to match speed on speed, and that's even today. You have to match speed on speed, and the teams defensively, whether it's in college or pro ball, the teams that are able to win and shut the other teams down in the throwing game are the teams that are going to lock your wide receivers down with defensive backs that can cover you and take those 2 guys out of your game. And even pro ball, that's their number one objective, is take the 2 wideouts out of the game.
Yeah, but I think with college, you see a lot of run and shoot, a lot of Hal Mummy and Leach's air raid.
Oh, yeah.
But not too many of those teams successfully win a national championship. It still seems like the best way to do this is to be able to run the ball down somebody's throat and be really physical on defense.
Well, everybody, go back to Florida with Steve Spurrier, everybody thought that he was throwing the ball every down. He had running backs over 1,000 yards every year. They ran the ball. Then you look at Oklahoma and said, okay, how did OU win? They won because of Nixon and Peterson and the running backs they had.
Yeah. Man, you look at Chip Kelly's offense at Oregon, where they run up against Auburn in a national championship game, get shut down. I just say, when you look at college football today and you look at all the coaches out there, outside of course, the Givens like Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Dabo Swinney, who are some of the coaches that stand out to you?
Well, there's an awful lot of coaches that can coach. But sometimes where they are dictates, what they can do.
Yeah.
But, if you go all the way up, I think Miami's got a great coach. And I've always felt if you stayed over 10 years any place, you stayed too long.
Yeah.
And Mark stayed over 10 years, and it was time for him to leave, and he did. And he'll do really outstanding there. But, there are coaches that are really good coaches. Cutcliffe at Duke is a good football coach. But is Duke going to win a national championship? No. That doesn't mean that they're not successful at being Duke, but they're not going to win a national championship because they don't have the same tools that other teams have. I think, Herman, Jimbo Fisher. I mean, I can name you guys that are really good football coaches, but we got to understand and realize, even in pro ball, how many teams in pro ball are equal. And they're not. I mean, there's a reason New England is winning. And it's not just because of Belichick. They're winning because everything's in sync from the front office all the way down. But one of the biggest reasons is that quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
now, could he go? No. I mean, same thing. I mean, you take Peyton Manning, They felt that he was through Indianapolis, and he goes to Denver and wins the championship.
Yeah, but I think if you look at that, I think in Indianapolis he probably was through. He goes to Denver, and then all of a sudden he's got the best defense in the league with him. Where in Indy, I don't think. Yeah, at Indy, I don't think that it would have went well for him if he kept playing there. So it worked out great for him, and in the end, it worked out great for Indianapolis because they got Andrew Luck, who until the injury problems still had the Colts playing at a high level.
Oh yes, I mean, you can go back to Joe Montana. You know, they cut Joe at San Francisco, and he goes to Kansas City. Young, I mean, it's hard to.
Steve Young, to me, is the perfect example of having to be at the right place at the right time because people thought he was a bust after his first 3 years in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, I think that you have to be in Pro Bowl. You have to be at the right place at the right time. And if you're not, then it doesn't work out for you.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing in college. You have to be a right fit as a coach, head coach in college to win at that college, at that university. If you're not a fit, that doesn't mean you're a bad coach, but you're just not a fit for that university.
Now,
go
ahead. Sorry about that.
There's 7 things that it takes to win in college. You have to have the administration that's going to build you and give you the facilities that it takes to win. You have to have the faculty, and people don't understand how important the faculty is because they can make it awful tough on your football team if they feel that you're abusing the kids academically.
Yeah.
You have to have the students support, the alumni, and of course, players and coaches in the media. And head coaches have, especially the young guys, have no idea how important the media is to helping you win. Because the media puts out good vibes or bad vibes, and if they're all positive, that trickles all the way down into the high school to help you recruit. Yeah. If they're not good vibes, then that trickles down and kills you in recruiting.
Yeah, and when we look at the college football, I think it's blown up the last few years from the college playoff system. I would like to see it go to maybe 8 teams, but what's your take on the college playoff compared to the old bowl system?
Well, there's no question that college football today is healthier than it's ever been. There's more money. Yeah, you can take Mississippi State where, they're getting a paycheck of $30 million. $30 million helps Mississippi State build facilities that they can compete. So that has helped everybody, and it's healthier than it's ever been. Now, everybody talks about, the haves and the have-not. See, I don't feel that it's that way. There's no way that Troy will ever be Auburn or Alabama. So why should they be on the same level or even think about being on the same level? What is going to happen is you on the Power 5 and the next group is going to end up having their own championship. So if I was at Middle Tennessee, for example,
yeah,
and I had a chance to win a national championship, and I won a national championship, that would do. I mean, you couldn't measure how much that would help Middle Tennessee, not only reputation-wise, academically, the students in the name. And so I really feel that they will have a national championship game very shortly.
So do you think that a team like Central Florida last year should have had an opportunity to play against an Alabama?
Well, I think you're
Basically,
asking
should you
somebody.
expand the playoffs to maybe 8 teams?
Yes, I think that it's going to be expanded. It has to be, because you only have 5 conferences and you only have 4 spots.
Yeah.
So if the Big Ten and the Pac-12 get left out again, it's going to get there very quick.
Yeah, and somebody's going to get left out every year, so I think it's going to get there relatively quick. And the thing that I think about that is, if you include a Central Florida, whether they win or not, everybody likes the underdog story. And the thing that really blew the NCAA tournament up was when you get to the late 70s. If you remember before that, I think the tournament was 16 or less teams up until about 1973 or so. And once you started including that, and you get an Indiana State playing for the national championship, and you get these small schools, which you see even today. I mean, last year, or this last tournament, the biggest story was in the first round where Maryland and Baltimore County beats Virginia. And I think if you could add that to the college football, I think it could get even bigger than March Madness.
Well, to me, it's bigger than March Madness today, because you don't even think or hear about basketball until the playoff game is finished.
Yeah.
So football has taken, it used to be basketball. And if you looked at the NCAA, all the committees were basketball people, because that's where the money came. But the Oklahoma and Georgia, when they sued the NCAA and won, that changed the NCAA's hold on football, and they lost it. They lost the television, and they lost other things that they had controlled, like they controlled basketball for years, or now. And so when they lost those, they have no power over the football today.
Yeah. But I do know this. I'm still not a big fan of the NCAA. I think they're one of the more corrupt organizations around. But
well, they are,
and
there's no question.
So my question to you is, do you think the players should receive some type of pay?
No, I don't think they should ever receive pay. I think that they should be treated like any other student. Now, if you take Oklahoma, for example. Now, Oklahoma is the number 1 public institution on national merit scholars. They go recruit them. But if they were under the NCAA rules, they would be on probation for 100 years.
Yeah.
Because they go and buy the student. Because the number 1 criteria of a rating a university is how many national merit scholars do you have. And I give the President Bourne of Oklahoma all the credit, because he went out and was very aggressive and competed to get the national merit scholars.
Yeah.
But the national merit scholar are a scholar student. They receive an awful lot of benefits from the university that the athletes never received. So what it should be equal, whatever the cost of and they call it the cost of attendance. And you can go on the internet and look up any institution and ask what the cost of attendance is. which means the extra money other than room, board, books, and tuition, to live in that community, to go to a movie, to eat. And, those actuariums are a lot smarter than we are, and they put all that together, and that's what they put out as the cost of attendance.
Yeah.
And so the students should receive those. I'm talking about the athletes. And now if you throw that in there, then the other thing that I would do, of course I'm not there anymore, I would take students and put it in reserve, meaning if they were able to sell jerseys or likeness or whatever, that would go into a reserve, and they would have to get their degree to get that money.
Yeah, see, we had a show on this a while back, and I had Steve Risley does a show with me. He played for Coach Knight on the 81 National Championship team, and his idea was, this was just basketball-wise, but they're talking about these guys that leave early and everything. His thoughts were, each year that a student, or each semester that a student completes, a student athlete, and they're academically still eligible, they get $5,000 put in a reserve bank account like that. And when their 4 years is done, if they graduate on time and have a grade point average above 2.5, that when they get done, they have that money to get started with their lives, because let's face it, not that many guys are going to play professional sports.
Yeah. No, and that would be very easy to do, and it would be fundable, and it would benefit everybody. And what caught my attention years ago, the military guys that were at the academy, they would get X, but most of them wouldn't take it. And then when they did graduate, then they got a big check, and that's where most of them went out and bought a car with.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the same thing, that, you finish your degree, and that's what you're there for. Finish your degree, and then you should receive some benefits.
Yeah. But, all right. I know we're an hour right now, and I know you're busy and probably got to go. I want to really thank you for coming on the show. It was an absolute honor to have you on today, Coach Sherrill.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and don't think that you guys that talk and talk to former players don't do everybody a service, because you're able to give information that they're not going to, the average person doesn't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and the reason we started this show was, you remember Eddie Metter?
Yes.
Because I interviewed Eddie Metter, and then after I interviewed him, his son calls me and starts talking to me, and I start to realize how important this is. And then Tombstone Jackson, the old Denver Bronco, and it just kept kind of going from there. And I think what gets lost in this big corporate NFL today is the guys that made it possible for the guys that play today to make the amount of money and live the lives they have, and for the fans to enjoy the game that they see today. I think people forget about the people who started it all. And that's kind of what we want to do, is give this story. I mean, to me, even your coaching career, you played for Bear Bryant. It doesn't get any bigger than playing for Bear Bryant.
Well, if you look at these guys, and I have been very fortunate for the last 3 years. I've been able to take former NFL players and help them with stem cell therapy.
Do you know Don Horn?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, Don's a great guy. He's been on a few times.
But it's amazing when you're looking at guys that played 13, 14, 15 years that made the NFL, and what kind of shape they're in today.
Yeah.
And they're not getting any help. all the money is going to the younger guys. All the insurance and all the NFLPA money is still going to the younger guys.
Yeah.
On the settlement is on a scale. If you're 45 or below, you get the max. It tops out at 80. So you're on a sliding scale all the way down to 80. So if you're 45, you get the max. But if I'm 80 and I played 17 years and helped build the league, I get 1/10 of what you get. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and when you hear the pensions, like Eddie played for over a decade, and I'm not going to say what he told me off air his pension was, but it's nowhere what people think it would be.
No. I don't know what it is today. I think you have to have 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah, it's 3.5 or 4, which is why the average player's done at 3.
Yep. Well, but you're right, and the old guys, they're not. That built the league. They're not treated like the young guys.
No, and the problem is the young guys don't do anything about it because when it comes time to vote for this, none of these guys ever realize that at some point they're going to be in the spot of being older because when you're a 25-year-old NFL player, you think you're invincible at that point.
Hey, I don't know of any 25-year-old that doesn't.
I know that, but I mean, if you're making millions of dollars on top of it, you're not thinking about, well, I got to give up this now to get this later. You're just worried about what you can get right now.
Absolutely. Well, and most of them have either 5, 10, or 15 people in their camp that's taking money away from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I interview a lot of boxers too, and they have more hangers on than anybody. I mean, Mike Tyson made $300 million, but now he's $9 million in debt. That's hard to do.
Yeah. Well, don't get me started. I've been sued by agents, so.
Yeah, agents can be something. Agents and lawyers, and But hey,
all right.
I would love to have you on right before the college season when we do our college preview show. If you want to break that down with us,
I'll be glad to. No problem.
All right, Jackie. It was, like I said, it was a pleasure having you on. I also want to remind everybody, Bill Moss, who played for you, was on the show a couple days ago. You can find that on thegruelingtruth.net also. I want to remind our listeners you can hear all of our shows on iHeart, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for Coach Jackie Sherrill, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.